Good evening. My name is Amos, Tarfa, and today I'll be sharing some thoughts about the times before us. I'm going to do my best to stay focused on the notes that I have, just so I make sure I cover the things that I need to cover. Today is June 28th, 2020. I'll be sharing some updates about the issues facing us today. If you want a copy of these notes, let me know and I can share them with you. Basically, we're going to be looking at a few items, and this video will be available on Facebook, but then it'll be people can also look at this later on if they don't get to all of it today. I'll be sharing about some of the updates on the issues facing us today. I pray this video serves as an encouragement to those who want to walk in the truth and also to love their neighbors. There is a point to the video, and it is not just here to be informative, but I hope that it helps each person to grow who is listening. Before I proceed, I want to say that I have noticed that people have set certain conditions on who can speak about these matters and who should not speak. I want to clearly state that just because I do not belong to a certain group does not mean I might not have advice or sort of encouragement. So it's really important that we're very careful not to disqualify people just because of the color of their skin or where they're from. We should give people a chance to share, especially if they're sharing love and they're trying to empathize with the matters at hand. One of the things that inspired this particular video was I saw an interaction between two people, and it had to do with the issues about Black Lives Matter and just black versus the treatment, police treatment of black people and this and that, those kinds of topics. And so it got me thinking about the situation, because this is what ended up happening. This happened to two different sets of people. One of them ended up not being very happy with the other person because they felt that the other person was not using the right terminology. And so today I'm speaking as one who has watched a lot of things happen, and I just want to share some of my thoughts and concerns for America at this point. So there is some fighting that is happening within, even between two people who might be Christians, for example, who might share a lot of things in common, but just because one of them says Black Lives Matter and the other one says all lives matter, and then you watch an interaction, and sometimes the interaction gets heated, and it really just saddens me to watch that happen. So I want to address those questions today, or those concerns. Ultimately, as I've said before, the heart condition is ultimately what matters. Where are people's hearts? Where are they? Where do their hearts lean? And let me explain what I mean by this. The people that I've watched have discussions, both of them are saying that they want to fight for the rights of people in minority groups. They want to stand for what is right and caring for people, depending on the setting. They want to talk about all those things. But just because one doesn't use the right terminology, they're somehow disqualified. Here's the deal. If somebody cares about working with people in a minority group, for example, and they love them and they want to support them, and they don't use the right terminology, I would be careful not to disqualify a person just because they don't use your terminology. And I'll break this down shortly. So the heart condition is ultimately what matters. I have seen and I have heard of situations where people are given a hard time, people are picked on because they say things like all lives matter, or that there are good cops and things like that. And I really want us to be very careful as we address these issues. Social media can be a great tool, but unfortunately it can also cause division amongst people. And we have to be careful, especially if the other people we're trying to talk to support the thing that we're dealing with. So, do we understand that there are people who do have a problem with other races? There are some people who are okay with racism. I just want to say that. There are some people that follow teachings that allow for racism as a thing to exist. And ultimately, you see from my conclusion that racism exists partly because of the problem of sin. And it is all over the place. It is in many settings. It happens where I grew up. It happens in other parts of the world. I grew up in Nigeria. I was born in northern Nigeria, and I moved to southern Nigeria. And I can tell you that even within that context, we had some competition once in a while. We had stereotypes that people put on people from my part of the country. So we have all sorts of discrimination against people all over the world in many settings. This thing happens because of sin, because of man's heart condition. So when we look at the issues at hand, we need to remember that there's racism all over the place in many settings. So we have to keep that in mind. It is not okay. Racism is wrong in any form. And it can happen from a black to a white person, and a white person to a black person, and a person of a different color. All those things happen. Ultimately, as someone once put it, people just have different different levels of melanin, and so that then becomes a defining factor. And I don't think it should be. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. Your life matters because you were created in the image of God. And we'll look at that in more detail. So the ones we should be concerned about are people who are okay with racism. And there are people out there that are okay with it. Unfortunately, I've watched people get bashed just because they have not supported or said things that match the narrative. And so then they get bashed. Meanwhile, they actually care about people of all races. And so it's the people who don't think that life matters for a certain group of people, etc., and so on and so forth. They're the ones that we need to be trying to encourage to rethink about what they're thinking about. Not bashing somebody just because they make a claim or a statement that is true, but just doesn't fit the narrative. I want to give a quick example of a man named William Wilberforce. He's very dear to my heart, and I want to take a minute to say this about Wilberforce. Wilberforce fought for the abolition of slave trade in England. He stood firm for truth. He wanted people to be free. There was a time where people were sold as slaves, and there's still some of that happening today, by the way, which is very unfortunate. But people were sold as slaves, and some of them were taken far away from their homes. And William Wilberforce wanted that to end. The movie called Amazing Grace talks about this. And when I was visiting the country where I grew up, my home country, one time, I realized that there's a lot of challenges before the situation there. There's a lot of challenges. And one of the challenges is the number of children that are out of school. And my heart just breaks for the fact that there's children who do not get a chance to get a solid education. We're talking about over 10 million children in just one part of where, just one country in Africa. And I was looking at the condition and thinking, what can we do to increase the number of children going to school? And I almost felt overwhelmed. And then I remembered William Wilberforce. He could have said, there's nothing I can do. There's many people who are okay with slave trade. I'm going to give up on slave trade. I'm just going to allow it to happen. But he stood and he fought. He worked hard to see that slave trade ended. So ultimately, what he was trying to do was he was trying to give people a chance to have an opportunity to flourish in life. That is one of the things William Wilberforce did. He worked hard to liberate people so that essentially they could flourish and they could worship God more fully. That example of William Wilberforce has played in my heart over and over again, and I've been reminded of the importance of standing for truth. So, as we look at these issues before us today, let us remember something. There is a theory that I call the lumping theory. I put it together a few months ago, and the theory goes in two ways. Before I go into detail on the theory, I do want to let you know there will be a part 2. This is just the part 1 of this discussion. And the theory goes like this. You meet someone who believes something, and because of the one thing they believe, you use that to judge everything else about what they believe. That's number 1. That's a little concerning, because just because someone believes one thing does not mean that they believe all the other things that some other people who believe that thing believe. That's number 1. We have to be careful not to label someone as many things that they're not, simply because of one thing they might believe. This is different from the fact that what they do believe. If what they do believe has implications that are far-fetching, that's different. Number 2, we meet one person from one group and we use them to judge everybody from that group. That is very dangerous and concerning. That's the second part of the lumping theory, I call it. One is when we take one person's idea and use it to judge every other idea about the person. And the second is when we take one person from one group and we use that to judge everything about people from that group. So here is what I want to do tonight. I want to list 7 things, and then I'm going to touch on them briefly. There will be a part 2. Please feel free to share your questions, your thoughts, your comments. So here are the topics I want to address. I want to address the topic of racism and just that question that people have asked me if I have seen that around me. Number 2, I want to address the topic of Black Lives Matter. Number 3, I want to address the topic of police and police reform. Number 4, I want to address the topic of what are the tangible steps that we can take. And number 5, what about this issue of possible victimization or victim mentality, Number 6, what systems in America are actually working? And number 7, what does it take to have long-lasting change? Now, I know there's a lot to chew on there. That's why I said there will be a part 2. But let me just touch on a few things right away. Number 1, racism. Yes, racism is a thing all over the world. And again, it's not just certain people that can be racist. Anybody can be racist. Anybody can look down on others because of one factor or the other. Not just racism, but other forms of discrimination. So the problem of racism is tied to the problem of man's heart and sin. Racism towards people of any group is not right. Does this still exist? Of course, because there's sin. And I don't think that it's something that you can get rid of, except you can change everybody's heart. Racism again is seen in every part of the world. So please, let's remember that. And let's do our best to stand for truth wherever we find ourselves. I want to skip over for 1 second and say this, and then I'll come back. The topic of police and police reform. I've seen a lot of news articles or things about disbanding the police in certain parts of the country. And I just want us to recognize the police statistics for good cop versus bad cop. I don't know that anybody has a specific number that is right on. In any profession, there will be crooks. There will be good, and there will be those who are troublemakers. I know there's even TV shows that they've tried to set up, and I don't watch these shows necessarily, but I've heard that there's shows out there about different people that they'll set up cameras, and then they'll call someone to do a project at a house, and they'll see if that person who they invite to do the project is going to be truthful. And they'll realize that the person might cheat the owner of the house. They might lie to the owner of the house. So almost in every profession, again, because of man's condition, we see people who are doing things that are not right. And so when we come to the police, am I going to say that everyone in the police force is 100% pure in heart and doing everything right? No, I don't think that would be honest. But I would also be dishonest to say that they're not crooks in every other profession. I say this partly because when I was in graduate school, I remember learning about physicians who were cutting corners, physicians who were telling patients that they had cancer, and those patients didn't have cancer or didn't have the type of cancer. And then the physician tried to treat a cancer on someone who didn't even have cancer. So I saw that in graduate school, and that's part of why they teach ethics to many scientists as a part of their graduate school training. So we see this in almost every field. What do I think about some of this? Well, have I encountered some things? Have I faced some things? Well, I mean, there's situations that might have happened. But if I'm pulled over, for example, for going a few miles per hour over, I can't look and say that I was pulled over just because of the color of my skin. I was going a few miles over and I was pulled over. How I'm treated, that's another question. Again, I can't say that everyone will treat me the same way, but I will do my part. I'll answer the questions. I'll be respectful. And I hope that the officer does their job well. I know many officers and people who are doing their job well and want to learn, by the way. I've had opportunities to talk with people in the police force who want to talk about issues surrounding these things. So please, I want us to know that yes, every profession needs to work in improving training. Every profession needs to work in encouraging people not to label people by the color of their skin. So we have to be careful not to dismiss. I know some cities are trying to dismiss their whole police departments. And I just think that's not going to be good. And that's part of my thought, but also because I have seen what can happen. That's a big topic. We can address that later. The next topic I want to address is the topic of Black Lives Matter. I want to take a few minutes to discuss this one. I don't have time to go into all the details, but when people say Black Lives Matter, there's two things that are going on. The first one is that they're talking about an organization called Black Lives Matter, and the second one is they're talking about a statement saying that Black Lives Matter. So let's look at these two situations. The first situation about a statement. If somebody says Black Lives Matter, and they're saying it in the context of, okay, all lives matter, Black lives matter, and we know that. We know that all lives matter. But one of the things that we have to answer, yes, all lives matter, Black lives matter, whatever color of skin someone mentions, all lives matter. But they matter because they were made in the image of God. And we have to remember that. Because people are made in the image of God, they need to be valued, they need to be loved, and they need to be cared for. That's why slavery in every form is wrong. That's why, again, racism or judging people based on the color of their skin is wrong. So the statement piece can actually go both two ways. One is someone is making a statement to remind a group of people who they might think had forgotten that that group matters, which when I look at things generally, though, I've met many people that are of different colors, and they've loved and cared and invested in my life independent of my skin color. So I know that they stand for truth, and they stand for all lives, and that's encouraging. But if somebody's saying Black Lives Matter is a statement because they're trying to make the case that somehow in America today, there is a large population that thinks Black lives do not matter, I'm sorry, I disagree with that statement. I do not see that in the part of America that I live. Now, I have not been to all 50 states, but I can tell you this, that again, there are some people who put people down because of their color or their skin color. I don't have too much more I can say to that group right now because some of them are probably not listening. But the ones who care and who want to do right, some of our neighbors, some of your neighbors who want to do right, let us be very careful in pushing them aside sometimes because we think they do not support certain people of certain colors. So we need to be careful with that in the act of making a statement, we end up pushing people away. We have to be careful. Which leads me to the second part, which is when people talk about Black Lives Matter as the organization. I do not have time to go into the organization side of things here, but I do want you to recognize something. As a Christian and one who follows the principles of God's word, the Black Lives Matter organization goes against the basic tenets of Christianity. It goes against the tenets of Christianity that have to do with the fact that God created them male and female. It goes against the tenets of Christianity that talk about just the family structure. It goes against the tenets of Christianity as Christianity defines marriage, the sanctity of life, and all of that. I believe from what I've read on the website firsthand and from what I've heard from some of those in the leadership and some of those who started the organization, some of them that said, and I quote, that they were trained in Marxist ideology. Some of that concerns me. Am I saying that there should not be, we should not stand and seek justice and seek truth for people from minority groups and so on and so forth? Well, there might be a case for that. If you have a community where there's people that are being bashed because of, they're being bashed because of their skin color, or they're being isolated all the time because of their skin color, then we need to speak to the chief of police. We need to speak to the legislators. We need to speak to the senators. We need to bring this before them and say, please, there's something that is not right here. And this leads me to one of the solutions, even with the police reform. I was listening to somebody who has spent a lot of his life or spent some time in prison and jail. One of the things he said is that the idea of police officers spending time with community members is a great opportunity for them to have dialogue and working together to bring solutions. So when we're talking about the organization Black Lives Matter, I'm sorry to say, I know that some people might not know, but a lot of the beliefs I'm seeing on the website of Black Lives Matter go against the fundamentals of Christianity. And as Ron Kenoly used to say, there was a famous song, whose report will you believe? I will believe Jesus' words. I will believe his truth. And Jesus' words are sufficient. They tell me to love my neighbor as myself. And I will stand for truth. And I will stand for those who have no one speaking for them. But to stand with an organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter, but in the mix puts in so much more that is beyond the scope of what the organization says that it's saying, then we have a problem here. We have a contradiction. Now, again, if somebody does not believe the tenets of Christianity, then they could choose to believe certain things. But if you believe in Christianity and the teachings of Jesus Christ, then you have to see that there's a contradiction. So that's what I have to say about that for now. If you haven't had a chance to visit the website or listen to the founder, you can do that for yourself. And some of that just troubles me because there's discernment that needs to happen at this time. When all these things are mixed up, when you start talking about Black Lives Matter, but you mix it up with so many other issues, then somebody who says Black Lives Matter and says they support the organization will somehow expect them to believe and support many other things that I don't think are in line with Scripture. If you want to know why I stand with Scripture and why God's Word is the foundation of my life, I have more videos on that and I can email them, or we can talk about that later on. So I've talked about the fact that racism exists. I've talked about the fact of Black Lives Matter as a statement and as an organization. And I've talked about the fact that every profession, including the police force, will do well to keep improving. And that is definitely, of course, the goal of many police departments. And the ones who are not improving need to be challenged and encouraged to do so. And we need to see how we respect those who are supposed to do their jobs, and we need to do our part in listening and being respectful, but at the same time, of course, we need to encourage them to grow and to do better in whatever they're being called to do. So please, I personally do not think we can dismiss everyone from the police force because of certain things that some people have done. Because I have met people that are crooked in many facets of life, including in politics. There are politicians that are crooked. Well, should we disband all of them? I don't think that solves the problem. So those are some things I want us to keep in mind. I know that I will definitely be touching base with some people about some of these topics, but I just want to say that there are some tangible solutions to the challenges before us, and I want to list a few of them before I go off this broadcast. First of all, so this is the solution section. We need to look at principles and long-term solutions to the things before us. We need to use principles that work to help people who are currently being held back, independent of their society's situation. In the field of education, for example, if there are places where people's education is not taken seriously because of their skin color, something needs to happen, and that should not be happening in America. We should stand with them and encourage them and provide opportunities for them if they feel like they're not getting those opportunities. I will answer the question of personal experience. Personally, I've only had encounters of maybe going some miles per hour over and getting pulled over and answering the questions before me, and then, most times the conversation went well. But I just want you to know that, again, I am taking blame for that. If I go 2 miles per hour over, 3 miles per hour over, and anything happens and I'm pulled over, that's my fault. It's nobody else's fault. Now, of course, just because someone can pull you over doesn't mean that they should be rude to you. Again, that's where the problem is, the individuals, not necessarily the system all the time. Now, there have been cases, people say, of very corrupt departments of different branches and this and that. That's where we do our part in calling for truth, in calling our representatives to do something about the situation. But in the process, let's be careful not to lump everybody into one group and condemn them. Have I noticed any form of racism around me or in my circle? Again, people might look at you different sometimes. This and that might happen. But I'm not going to play a victim card. I'm not going to allow how people look at me to affect how I live. I'm going to move on with my life. I've been to places where maybe they've never met a black person before. And so I can't judge someone harshly because they looked and saw a black person and they're, oh, okay, what am I supposed to make of that? I can't go question them and ask them a questionnaire. What are your thoughts? And these are things that happen. I see this happen, but I will not allow it to affect what I'm seeking after and what I've been called to do. We have to be kind to other people. No matter where they're at, no matter what their background, we have to seek to be kind to them, and that's just a fact. My time in the Midwest overall has been very pleasant, and I thank God for my friends that I've met from different backgrounds, from different countries. And please, if there are people here who are listening who are in parts of the country where you feel like there's oppression, well, let's talk and let's see what can happen. I personally do not believe in insults. I do not believe in insults because a statement is either true or false. So if a statement is true, then I listen to it and I adjust accordingly if somebody's trying to speak to me. And if a statement is false, I brush it off and I forget about it. So I do not believe in insults. And so I say that to lay the stage because some people get concerned about what others say about them in terms of, oh, what they said might be insulting, this, that, and the other. Please let us learn to brush things off and move on. I am very concerned that part of human nature is the victim mentality that can happen. Anybody can say that they feel like a victim for whatever situation. Even think about the poor and the rich within the same situation, within the same demographic. There are some people that work for a company and that the company is doing its best to provide for these people, but they can go out and say, well, I don't feel like things are done the right way and I feel like I'm a victim and this and that. We have to be careful. Everybody might have something to say about their situation. Some people grew up with difficult situations with parents. Some people grew up with difficult situations with siblings. So whatever the case, let us ask ourselves, how can we rise up and move forward and encourage one another rather than allowing a victim mentality to take place? Because that can happen in any profession. And so we have to be very careful when it comes to the issue of the victim card, which can come. Don't get me wrong. There are situations where people are being sidelined or not treated right. I get it. But I'm saying if I'm going to sit there and find things that people might see in me or they looked at me this certain way, so I'm going to start feeling bad about myself. No, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to encourage anyone to do that. I'm going to encourage us to do what is right, to press forward, and to recognize that there are some people who believe certain things about reality that are just false. There are people who think that certain races are actually not equal to other races. Or certain skin colors, are different from other skin colors. There are people who believe that, and that's just a sad reality. Don't allow that to hinder you from doing what you need to do. So, in conclusion, let's look at some long-lasting change solutions. We've talked about the fact that we should not play the victim card. We should do our best to do our part. If there's injustice, we need to call the people that need to address the issues that you might be sidelined for. For example, maybe you went to a restaurant and somebody didn't serve you because of your skin color. Now, someone might argue that the restaurant owner can do whatever, but you should also be able to just share your thoughts. And it's very unfortunate if that happens. And unfortunately, that still does happen in some communities, which is very sad. As I thought about all the systems in America, I think about healthcare and education, prison reform and police reform. And one of the things I realize is that every single system needs work. No system is perfect. Every system needs work. And that's just the reality. And yet, there are so many people that want to come to America. Doesn't that blow our minds to realize that we have a country that has a lot of work that needs to be done, and yet many people want to come? So maybe that's a word of encouragement to those who might be in America, but feel like America as a whole has failed in everything. America has things to grow in, but America has not failed at everything. America is growing and seeking to do better. And look at a country where you can share your thoughts and your opinions. This is a country that has been blessed, and we need to remember that. Every single sector needs improvement. That's just the way it is. But is there any country that has everything perfect? That's something that we should ask ourselves. I don't think there is any country on this earth that is like that. I understand that some people just want everyone to be treated with equality in matters. And again, I could tell you that there is work to be done in areas where all these areas I've listed. If you know anyone, and I'm making this claim now, if you know anyone in a field or in a city where they feel like their education is not good enough, like they're not going to go far, if you know someone who feels stuck in their community because they feel like there's injustice, please, I plead with you, feel free to pass my email, and let's see how we can work together to provide education enrichment for them so that they can get through their high school and even maybe get into college and move on if that's a track they want to go with. What I'm saying is there are tools online. There was a time where there was not enough resources for people to get help. But if you can get to a library, if you can get on the internet, there is almost nothing that you cannot do. There are people that have learned so much on the internet, independent of whatever their school situation. So please, if you know anybody who feels they're stuck because of wherever they're at, then let's talk and let's find solutions to their situation. What is interesting, as I said, is that in the midst of all the areas that we need to improve in America, we still see many people who want to come to America. When we look at life in the 60s in America or in the 50s, we can see that there has been some progress. I will not have some of the opportunities I have today if I lived back in some of those decades. But by God's grace and as things have worked out, I am living in a time and age where I can speak and I can share and I can have dialogue with people of other races. I can attend universities with people of other races and high schools and play sports with people from other races. That has not always been the case. So please let us not be ungrateful in recognizing that America has made progress. Let us be grateful for where we're at and let us press forward. I'm not an expert in everything, but what I can tell you is that everyone has a role to play making a difference in the world. In our daily schedules, what deliberate steps are we taking to bring about positive change? In our weekly schedules, what deliberate steps are we taking to bring about change? For all people, people that we encounter. Maybe it's those who are poor and don't have opportunities. Maybe it's those who are being sidelined because of one thing or the other. Maybe it's people with disabilities that are being mistreated. What are we doing to stand for truth for them? By the grace of God, I've had a chance to mentor people who were in prisons and jails, and I can tell you that one of the things that was key in a lot of my conversations with them is that fathering is very important. We need to emphasize the need for fathers to step up. Fathering is key in all races. It doesn't matter what skin color people have. We have to understand the important role that plays. And so when the father fails, it affects everything. And so why am I bringing this up? Because that is a very important aspect from my work with people in the prisons and the importance of mentors coming into people's lives. And so we need to look at long-lasting change. We need to be careful not to allow people's words about us to influence how we live. We need to be careful that we do not undermine the role of parents in people's lives. Fathers and mothers and families functioning as they should will allow families to flourish. We need to seek for long-lasting change, and that can only happen when we go to the root. We need to deal with the root problem. We can't just point fingers at one group or this and the other. We need to look at all the areas we have to step up. We have to step up in parenting. We have to step up in education. We have to step up in calling people to live lives that bring honor to the Lord. We have to step up in all areas of life. So that is one thing I want to say. Humans are complex. We don't have to say that only one solution from this one group can solve all these problems. We need to say all issues, all hands on deck. How are we all doing our parts in bringing and lifting people up? rather than allow them to be brought down. We need to take personal responsibility. Again, if I get pulled over for speeding, I need to take personal responsibility and not say that I was pulled over because of my skin color. If I was speeding, then that is me. I was the one who was responsible for it, not putting the blame at somebody else. Again, that does not mean that the person who pulls me over should be rude and so on and so forth, but that's just, I need to take responsibility for my part in that encounter, and then I need to do my part in doing what is right. We need to be realistic with our expectations. As long as there's human beings, and as long as there's sin, and as long as there's wickedness, I'm not a pessimist, but I can tell you that as long as all those things exist, then you will see one form or the other of racism. Even amongst people in the same country, as I said, in Nigeria, for example, there are people that are being put on the sidelines. There are people that are suffering within the country. So let's not think that racism is something that only applies to one dimension. It is in all facets of society, and it is very sad. Humans are more complex than we realize. That's why we shouldn't use the lumping theory. We need to look at people and take them as individuals. We need to give people a chance to share where they're at and not disqualify them because of their skin color or this, that, and the other. And that applies to both black and white, people of different skin colors. It doesn't matter. We need to give people a chance to share truth. There are people who love and want to do what's right, and we need to stop sidelining them because they're not using the right phrases, quote unquote. So I'll say this, and this was a lot to chew on today, but I will have a part 2 where I go maybe into more questions that people might have. I want to say this, that one of the most practical ways and practical solutions is in the issue of mentoring. As I said, I only use the example of the jails and prison to give a context, but what I've noticed is that when people are talking about the injustice in society or whatever, all the things they might see, my question is, what are we doing in mentoring the future generation? We have a lot of celebrities sitting in their very expensive houses and making statements. What are they doing? What steps are they taking to mentor people? What steps are they taking to give more children a chance to get through high school, to provide the resources to get them even into college? Now, some are doing it. Good. But my point is, if we're not taking steps, if we're not doing anything to mentor the upcoming generation, then we have to be careful to think that all the problems are societal, all the problems are at some level of a structure in society, rather than recognizing there's a grassroots element. And we need to pursue that at the grassroots. We need to seek to make change happen. Am I going to make time to go mentor a young man? Is somebody going to make time to go mentor somebody who needs a mentor and help guide them and encourage them? Are we going to encourage people to have families that are intact? Are we going to encourage people to recognize that there is a place, there's a reason? The Bible encourages, when families are together and you have children, there's a good, that is good. And that applies to all communities. It's not only to one community, but all communities need to ask themselves, what are we doing within? What am I doing personally? What are we doing within? And yes, if there are things that are clearly wrong from a societal point of view, then talk to those who need to be talked to. And do not bash other people just because they do not agree with your phrase or your statements that you're making. This is a lot to chew on. I plan to record at least one other video. I just wanted to list all these things out, and I hope and pray that we will recognize that America has come a long way. There is so much that has happened. There's so much good that is happening in America. There's so many good people who care for people of all races, and we need to be careful not to sideline them or make them feel guilty for whatever skin color they have. Instead, we need to say, how can we come together to encourage everybody from every background within our context, within our society, and lift them up and encourage them to be who God made them to be, just like William Wilberforce did with the issue of slave trade. My friends, that's a lot to chew on. My call and plea is that we should stand for truth. We should stop fighting one another. We should stand for what is right, and we should seek to bring honor and glory to God ultimately. The problem of man's condition is sin, and Jesus made a way through his sacrifice on the cross. That is ultimately the solution, that people will surrender their lives and surrender their hearts to Christ so that he reigns in it, because in a heart that Jesus reigns in, you cannot have racism. You cannot have putting people away because of one condition they have or the other. Instead, you look at them, created in the image of God, you love them, you care for them. And that's my prayer. Thank you for listening.